Okay.
So next we're going to talk about some of the internals, some of the internal details of the Chief. And
As in
there were some,
crankshafts,
yeah, there were some
crankcases?
differences, and we'll
Okay.
talk. Yeah, we could talk about the crankshafts. The 1928 crankshaft
Yeah,
is
was
just
pretty standard.
pretty standard for its day.
What's that slot down at the bottom? What's that?
That's just for oil, to circulate oil from the bottom to this spot in the upper main bearing. So that.
Oh,
had a
okay, so
pipe.
we've got a connection.
There's a
pipe
connection between here and
okay.
here, and
all right. No, let's slow down and let's take a look at that. The pipe connection is right here
to here.
and right here, and that slot feeds that with the. These are timed so that they.
Yeah.
These are exposed to that hose line
Right.
when it is pressure in the crankshaft.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
or vacuum at the top.
Yeah. So that
Okay.
So that. The thought was that's how we got some oil up to the upper main barrel.
Yeah, because that slot right there is
timed.
Is timed. It's right there, and then the upper one's almost 180 degrees apart from it. Yeah, that'd be right. So yeah, okay, good.
So in 28, they made it through the year with just nothing very exotic about that. Any crankshaft from any most Class B engines in 1928, or even the Alto Quad was no different than this. Now,
But it had this feature.
well, not that feature.
That
but
features I've never seen before.
as far as the bronze connecting rods and the case hardened steel
Okay.
crankshaft was pretty standard. Although we know Evinrude,
So we're talking solid bearings here.
Solid
we're not
bearings,
talking
plain
roller
bearings,
bearings.
right.
Okay.
whereas the Evinrude Speedy Twin and Fast Twin from the same time had roller bearings.
And gave them a tremendous amount of more horsepower.
I don't know if it gave them more horsepower, but it gave them good high-speed longevity.
Well,
So-
my experience between the Lockwood Chief and the Evinrude Speedy Twin or Fast Twin, or what Fast Twin, is that the 20 cubic inch?
Yeah.
Yeah, was that it had a little more zip on the same boat.
Yeah. So why is it then the Chief really took over back in 1928?
Kiss, baby, advertising and
Right.
salesman. What else can you
Okay,
say?
Well, good.
Stupidity reigned back then as well as it does today.
So the technology other than Evinrude was is a bronze connecting rod, plain bearing, and the crankshaft. So it became really clear that it was a very limiting factor for high-speed use, and the Lockwood people really did some testing with oils. And you have to realize is these engines were running marathons for hours, wide open. And one of the things they called for in racing, where a motor may be working at speeds above 4,000 RPM, under high pressure and temperature, a still better grade of oil and more of it is required. At the time of this instruction, book is written, nothing superior to Sinclair Liberty Aero Oil has been found. It is a very heavy grade of oil. It takes time and care to mix proper portions of 2 pints of oil to 1 gallon of gasoline. So that's a quart to a gallon. Okay?
Wow.
But it's even better than that. And it says here, if that is not available, heavy duplex grade V has also shown good results and is also recommended. The extra heavy automobile oil such as Mobil B or D or extra heavy Polarine must be used in even larger proportions, namely 2.5 pints per gallon.
Oh, God.
Right.
So basically, when we're talking about heavy oils like that, we're also talking about drag.
Right.
I mean, that heavy oil has a drag factor. I mean, it's...
Yeah, but once it's at temperature, I think it's minimal.
Okay.
I mean, it became very clear when you read this that they recognized a real limitation, right? To say that, well, with the best oil we have, you still have to use a quart to a gallon, a 4-to-1 mix. And I think that otherwise you get that.
Okay.
Okay. And if you look at lots of these Lockwood parts and pieces,
Well,
there's lots of evidence of trouble.
there's in the 70s, missability became a big issue
Right.
in the outboard industry.
Yeah.
When they started, McCulloch started selling 100 to 1, and then OMC went to 100 to 1, which was not a good thing for them.
Right.
They had some disasters, but missability of the 50 to 1 oils was a big issue, and I think today those oils have lubricating properties which are far, far superior to what you're talking about back in the 20s.
But you don't know that.
I personally used to run my Lockwood Chief on a 25 to 1, 50 to 1 type oil mix. And the engine ran fine. I never threw any rods or anything, but it didn't develop full horsepower because the piston sealing wasn't good. And when I added that heavier oil, I had much better performance out of the engine. They picked up almost 500 RPM.
So I can tell a similar story. In the middle or later 70s, I had a 1928 Lockwood Chief that I really spent a lot of time working on and building, and it ran really nice. And I ran it for months on a heavy Penyan wood boat. And I ran it on 16 to 1, which is a half a pint of oil to a gallon of gasoline. And that came as a result of, there was a movement around that people were saying, oh, the new oils are much better than the old oils. They're much better. You don't need anywhere near as much. And I listened to that, okay? I didn't read this book, unfortunately, at the time. And so I was running this Lockwood Chief on 16 to 1.
What kind?
Well, it was just something
Don't
off
tell
the
me
shelf.
AMSOIL.
No, it wasn't. No, it was not AMSOIL.
Something off the shelf.
It was something off the shelf.
Yeah, well, there was some really bad oils in the 70s
sure.
out there,
I'm
too.
sure it
Really
was.
bad oils.
And so, and that went fine for some months. And then I went to an outboard meet, and somebody loaned me a 12-foot aluminum boat. And I put the Chief on the aluminum boat, and it just leaped out of the water. I mean, the boat weighed nothing. And in about 30 seconds, it threw a rod.
Well, yeah, but that could have been over revving, too.
Oh, it was revving. It was revving out nice.
Over revving. I mean, how much do those bearings take in terms of RPM?
Well, they can't take it, because what happens is it's all about centrifugal force. So at RPM, that connecting rod is on the end of this crank throw, and it's spinning oil off. It's trying to centrifugally dry that surface.
Right.
Right. So it's easy to see how that could happen.
So we're talking about oils. Could we solve this by you and I both putting on a pair of boxing gloves and see who could beat the other one to death?
Sure, I'd love to. So whatever the case, when I took the engine apart, there was no question it was a lubrication failure.
Okay.
And unfortunately, at the time, I fell under the influence of some people. I was young myself, inexperienced, that would just go around and say, you don't need that much oil. You don't need much oil. The new oils are so much better. You don't need anywhere near that much oil. Well, once I saw the damage as a result of not enough oil, I said, I'm never going to have that ever happen again. And over the years, I've studied oils and conditions, and it became very clear. Once I understood the effects of centrifugal force, and this book talks about that a little bit, at over 4,000 RPM, it tends to dry.
That would make sense to me, and that would also answer some of the questions about over revving on that boat. It was fine. It
was fine,
so long
right.
you held it at the RPMs it was made to operate at. But
Exactly,
you
right.
go over that, you're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
Right.
No, but yeah.
So, there's other little piece of it when it sounds like there's a lot of oil being used. But you have to look back at model airplane engines back in the early days. When you read the ingredients on the can, the methanol little glow plug engines,
Yes.
they were running 1/3 castor oil
Yes.
like 33% castor oil in
Yes.
that mix.
Yeah.
So there's a 3-to-1 mix, and those engines ran quite well.
Yeah, and they were a solid bearing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Evinrude went to in 28. The Speedy Twin and Fast Twin went to roller bearing for good reason,
Yeah.
really good reason. And but the conservative Lockwood people did not, as well as
Are you mixing today in your Lockwood Chief? Are you putting in 1 quart to a gallon?
no, I'm running 8-to-1,
Okay.
a quart to 2 gallons, and it's going pretty good.
Okay.
I'm quite pleased with that. Now, not only wasn't the power heads plain bearing, but same with the lower unit.
So why are you going less than they recommend in that booklet?
I'm taking a big chance.
You what?
I'm taking a chance. So
So in other words, you've sort of come to a conclusion that somewhere in between is not a bad place.
Because I don't race. I'm not a real racer. But maybe I run these engines like a race engine. I don't know.
You do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the things,
Especially if somebody's
let's say
passing you.
in my own mind, I've been able to get some comfort in the oil that I use. And I bought Aeroshell 120, which is the same
60 weight.
as SAE 60.
Right.
And that's what I run at the 8-to-1 mix. And I'm quite content with that. Yeah. And the other thing that
I run mine a little bit lighter than that, but I also add 50-to-1 oil in with it too.
yeah, that may be good oil. We just don't know.
The lubricity of it is better. I prefer the heavy stuff for sealing and the light stuff for lubricating, but who knows?
Well, I'm not going to put it to the test.
Well,
if I could
I do. So
if I could turn the clock back to when this book was written and do testing on real Lockwood Chiefs and see how little oil they can run on.
No, I'm not about to do that either. No,
Yeah, I'm
I
not
agree
either.
with
so,
you. Right.
So we have to find what seems to work for us. Now, the Chief that you have that I was able to take apart last winter showed no damage at all.
Now that engine I ran for at least 6 years on a basically 25-to-1 with 50-to-1 oil.
Well, it showed no damage at all as a result of any
Right.
lubrication failure. None at all.
Right.
So anyway, the plain bearing business, the Lockwood people even stayed with in the lower unit. It's unusual to see a lower unit without any roller bearings at all. There's nothing. There's most of these lower units.
Even Johnson in that 28,
Had a ball bearing in
34
there,
had a
right.
ball bearing
Yeah,
back
yeah.
here, a disc
So,
ball bearing.
so this has nothing but a thrust area.
Yeah.
A plain bearing thrust area, and they seem to work quite well.
Yeah.
Now,
So long as the lubrication's maintained in the lower unit, yes. I mean, that's key.
the lower
Key.
unit that was on this engine was totally shot. It was totally worn out. All the bushings were just totally worn out. And so this engine has some interesting, if you look at things like this, okay,
That's got some time on it.
this engine has a lot of time on
Yeah,
it. And
yeah.
the lower unit showed it. The power head was actually quite good, so whatever they used for oil seemed to do quite well. Lots of carbon, so they probably used pretty heavy oil. And
People
lots
don't
of,
like to check lower units, and those things are a pain in the neck.
No, I know
to
they are.
change.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
so you tend to ignore it.
Right.
Winters, summers, winters, it's still running. Let's not worry about it.
Yeah, so typical, we talked about the rods,
Yeah.
the crankcases, but one thing I want to talk about is,
How about the oiling system in the 29? Let's
well,
talk
that's what we're
about
going
that
to
for a
talk
second.
about now.
Okay.
We're going to go over that. So
This is the 29 crankshaft
Yeah,
right here.
yeah.
It has a slot oil, but
Right.
this hole right here in the journal is connected to that hole. So
Right.
instead of the oil going back up to the top, it goes
Well, it does-
directly to the journal. Same here.
well, it
same
can
thing
make
with
it
the
up.
top.
If you look at the diagram, it shows the oil reservoir and some of the oil from that reservoir going to that crank pin,
Yeah.
and then some of it working its way up
and going the other to
other
the
crank
top.
pin. So
Let's take a look at that oil
yeah,
reservoir.
So Lockwood.
Can you show me the oil
Yes.
reservoir?
Lockwood, realized at some point in 1928 they were in trouble lubrication-wise,
Okay.
and so they immediately change the design to this. Pretty standard, crankcase. But they went to this system.
What are you talking about reservoir? There's reservoirs there, but I don't see any reservoirs on this.
Right in here, you see, in these pockets.
Yeah, but how do you
That's what it
access
is.
them?
You don't. They just...
Yes, you do. There they are. There's a screen hole, right?
Right. Yeah, so the oil...
Right there. Right.
Right there.
Right there. Yeah.
So the oil that gets slung around in the crankcase eventually drips down into
Yeah.
the bottom and collects and fills these reservoirs. That oil is available to be delivered to the crank pins.
Like we saw. Yeah.
we saw.
Cool. Yeah.
So
Very
this
good.
passage kind of goes up on an angle,
Yeah.
and then it's connected to this one on an angle. If you think about it, it's a lot of extra money to make a crankshaft like this,
Yes.
right?
What's this hole right underneath here?
This one here.
Yeah, what's
That's like
that?
a breather hole. That's like, you see it's on an angle? So when the oil comes up, it can bleed more oil
Oh, down. Okay.
down at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an air bleed.
I see.
Yeah. It's very clever, by the
So
way.
basically, it splashes oil onto the end of the other end of the connecting rod, too.
Yeah.
I would say
Well,
that it
will.
collects in
Yeah,
here.
Well, at
Maybe.
4,000 RPM, there's not much collection.
Well, it's going to be always traveling out
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah. So anyway, they recognized the problem, and they solved it with this. Instead of going to roller bearings, which they should have, they did it this way.
Okay.
And but that was the conservative. And in this book, he talks about how good plain bearings are if they're properly lubricated.
Okay.
And you can see
What book is this?
this is the
Marine engines.
yeah, that's the motor series, motorboat
Ideal
series.
motorboat. Okay,
Right.
motorboating. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very good book. It talks about all these.
And that other book
Features.
you've got there is the Lockwood
This
Owner's
is the
Manual.
Lockwood Owner's Manual.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Hmm. So anyway, these engines are susceptible to damage, and whatever the argument is about oil, the factory demonstrated that they admitted to having a problem by going through all this trouble to make a more expensive crankshaft to be able to stay with plain bearings. Realizing that to go to a roller bearing rod is a kind of a big deal. That means forged steel connecting rods. That means a different configuration of crankshaft and crankcase.
Now, did they hold with this lubricating system even in the Sea King era
Yes.
when it was under
Oh,
OMC?
Yes.
So, in other words, the factory supported a couple of different ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, because at that time, OMC
They could have gone to roller
part of
bearings, really
Evinrude had the Evinrude engines
Yes.
had roller bearings. Yeah. Okay.
They could have, but I think all these parts were already made. They were
Yeah.
on the shelf.
Yeah.
And they just
And we had the Depression, which knocked sales into a cocked hat.
and the Sea King outlet was a good outlet to sell off leftover stuff.
Yeah.
So that's that. Oh, so while we're on crankshafts, now I wanted to talk about, and this is maybe not so much design, but it's more for starting. So, and I've seen Lincoln be punished by this timing issue. Okay, so if you look at the 28 crank, the keyway is lined up with the center line of the
Yeah.
90 degrees from the throws.
Okay. Yeah.
And what that means is that on the magneto, on the where top dead center, where the engine fires at top dead center, and we'll use this one as an example.
Okay.
Top dead center on a 28 where it fires is about here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's top dead center.
Hang on, let me get around the other side. This is not good for me to step through. I'll lean over the top here. So top dead center is way over
It's
there.
way over here on a
Okay.
1928 Chief,
Yeah.
as well as a 72T Lockwood and a 62T.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
And
the-
I've heard people complaining about starting those earlier engines by having the rope get yanked out of your hand, because everybody thinks, well, that's the starting point.
Yeah.
And that's, on most engines, that's where it is, but not on these.
Kale is, I think, is way back there too.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
The American Bosch mag was maybe a little farther back as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that at some point the Lockwood people said, oh, well, everybody's getting hurt.
So this is the equivalent of a 29 over here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is a 29,
Oh, that's
but I
a
just
29.
parked it.
Oh,
I
you just were
parked it,
showing us
just
how.
to show
Okay.
you.
You're right.
But if you look at the keyway on the 29 in my left hand, you see it's
Slightly offset.
it's offset.
Yeah.
And what that does is it makes it top dead center is over here.
Oh.
So if you're used to starting, an engine over here,
28, you're liable to get it yanked out of your hands. if you
here
go
it's
to a
pretty safe. But
28 for 29.
I saw it happen to you.
Yeah, you did?
Yeah, you got the rope yanked out of your hand with yours
I did?
because you had this in the middle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was great. I
You
enjoyed
like
it.
that?
I
That
really
made your
did like
day?
it. Yeah,
All
it
right,
made my
good,
day.
good.
And
At
so
least-
anyway, that's just one little starting
Huh, very interesting.
thing
No
to
idea.
remember, right? So the problem is if you have a 28, you may not know if it has a 29 crank in it or not. Because I have one at home that has a 29 crank in it.
So if we disguise it somehow and get you to try and start it, maybe we can see you get one yanked out of your hand.
You're not gonna, because I know better.
Oh, okay, all right. It's nice. It's nice to know people know everything.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
good. It's
Yeah,
very good.
yeah.
Yes.
So, and the way you know that is you could pull this cover off.
Yeah.
Right.
And see where the points
See
open.
where the points break in
Right.
relation to top dead center.
All right.
That's all.
Good.
It's that simple. And of course, while we're talking about starting, we talked about it a little before. The other starting technique is I highly recommend not starting them at full choke. And we talked about that. So
Well,
just
Bill, you've discussed this starting business for years, and I still watch you suffer with.
right. I haven't implemented it all the time.
You,
right, for sure. Right.
you forget
Yeah.
your best instructions.
All right, so we covered lots of little internal details now, and lubrication and all that. So the last part of this discussion, we can talk about some little, accessories, that's next.
Okay.
What are the Lockwood accessories? So